Both NASA and SpaceX hope to explore Mars within the coming decade. However, the journey to Mars requires a much longer space mission than has ever been performed, due to its large distance from Earth and its longer orbit. Unfortunately, however, this is a serious problem for astronauts, because even short space missions are known to negatively affect the brain. This is a result of the low gravity in space, a state which is known as microgravity. Here, microgravity causes the brain and its fluids to shift within the skull. This shift impacts the brain's structure and function, and consequently presents a serious hurdle for astronauts in their space missions to Mars. Gravity is the force which pulls all objects down towards the centre of Earth, and on Earth this gravitational force has therefore influenced the evolution of animal species. This influence of gravity over biology can be observed across 3 different systems that affect brain function. Firstly, it has driven the evolution of our cardiovascular system, such that blood must be delivered around the body and brain against gravity, which is achieved through the use of pumps and valves. This has evolved in order to prevent blood from accumulating within the lower limbs of the body, such as the feet and legs. Secondly, this concept also applies to another system called the ventricular system, which is an interconnected series of cavities in the brain. These cavities contain a fluid called cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. CSF is a clear fluid that provides nutrients to the brain and removes waste from the brain, and around 500 milliliters of CSF is produced every day by a brain structure called the choroid plexus. The choroid plexus resides in the walls of the ventricles. The CSF that it produces then circulates around your ventricular system before it finally exits the brain via the subarachnoid space. Here your CSF is replaced every 8 hours. Finally, the third system in your brain that is affected by microgravity is called the vestibular system. And your vestibular system is important for deducing your body's position in space. Here your vestibular system is located within your inner ears, and it contains 3 structures called the semicircular canals. These semicircular canals are oriented in 3 planes, namely horizontal, anterior vertical, and posterior vertical. Contained within these semicircular canals is a gelatinous fluid called endolymph, and therefore whenever your head moves, this causes the endolymph to move as well. At the end of each semicircular canal are hair cells which protrude into the endolymph, and therefore whenever your endolymph is moving, this causes the hair cells which protrude into the endolymph to bend. This bending of hair cells in response to endolymph movement activates sensory cells, which therefore signals your body's new position along each axis in 3-dimensional space. Furthermore, above the endolymph are structures called otoliths, which sit on an otolith membrane. These otoliths are tiny stone crystals which have weight to them, and therefore as a result of gravity, whenever your head is moving, this also causes the otoliths to move. This movement of otoliths then causes movement of the endolymph, which causes the same bending of hair cells and subsequent activation of sensory cells. As a result of all of this, the vestibular system has therefore been called the one sensory organ dedicated to gravity perception. Therefore, altogether, alterations in gravity causes the fluids in our brains and body, namely the blood, CSF, and endolymph, to become altered, all of which are huge problems for space travel. In outer space, there is only a small amount of gravity, and so therefore instead of blood being pulled down towards the feet by gravity as on Earth, blood is instead pushed upwards towards the head and the brain. This means that there is an excessive amount of blood in the brain, and given that the amount of space in your skull is limited, this consequently puts pressure on brain tissue, which is called intracranial pressure. And in addition to this redistribution of blood in microgravity, the brain itself also moves upwards towards the top of the skull, a displacement which disrupts the flow of CSF out of the brain. Consequently, more CSF is able to accumulate within the ventricles, causing the ventricles to become enlarged. Interestingly, this ventricular enlargement is also found within normal aging, suggesting that microgravity accelerates brain aging, as enlarged ventricles are a known risk factor for dementia, and is also associated with age-related cognitive decline. Altogether, this redistribution of the brain, its blood and CSF, is thought to produce a syndrome called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, also known as SANS. This is a condition that is observed in most astronauts after they have spent over 6 months working in space. Here, this redistribution of blood and CSF can lead to swelling of the brain, but also swelling of the optic nerve, which is the nerve that transmits signals from your eyes to your brain. Consequently, the swelling of the brain and optic nerve causes changes to astronauts' vision, such as by making it difficult for them to see things that are close by, or by causing their vision to become blurry. Consequently, SANS has previously been known as Visual Impairment Intracranial Pressure Syndrome, or VIIP. And finally, in addition to the movement of blood, CSF and the brain as a result of microgravity, low gravity also has the effect of disrupting the accuracy of bodily information that's being sent to the brain by the vestibular system. This is because the otolith organs within the inner ears are no longer being pulled down by gravity, and therefore the otoliths can no longer be relied upon to provide accurate information about the body's position in space. So to summarize, microgravity causes a variety of changes in the position of the brain, as well as in the distribution of its fluids, as has been observed in short space missions of approximately 6 months to a year in duration, with 437 days being the current record for the longest space flight that has ever been performed. But what does all this mean for astronauts when it comes to longer space missions like a trip to Mars? At present, the Moon is the only celestial body that humans have ever visited, and it is the furthest distance that astronauts have ever travelled in space. This is because the Moon is Earth's closest neighbour, and it is located an average of 200,000 miles away throughout its orbit around Earth. In the 1960s and 70s, NASA performed various space missions to the Moon as part of Project Apollo, and these space missions required astronauts to spend up to 2 weeks at a time in outer space. However, in contrast to the Moon's distance of 200,000 miles away, Mars is instead around 140 million miles away, and therefore a round trip to Mars would take a whopping 3 years to complete. Consequently, if successful, a space mission to Mars would greatly surpass the Moon landings in being the longest and furthest space mission to be performed in human history. However, since the infamous Moon landings of the 60s and 70s by NASA, collaborations have since been built across several countries to create a huge spaceship called the International Space Station, which astronauts have been visiting since the year 2000. Here, the International Space Station, or ISS, is located 250 miles above Earth. The ISS serves as an impressive and versatile research laboratory in which space technology is tested, scientific experiments are performed, and effects of microgravity are investigated. Within these space missions, astronauts travel to the ISS and work there in trips that typically last as long as 6 months to a year, and as a consequence of performing these longer longer space missions, spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome was formally discovered. Originally, however, the symptoms of SANS were dismissed as being merely anecdotal or short-lasting in duration. However, it has since been found that a whopping 70% of astronauts experience symptoms of SANS after spending 6 months to a year at the ISS, as a consequence of exposure to microgravity. Furthermore, evidence also suggests that these longer spaceflight times are associated with longer neurological recovery times, with some astronauts experiencing symptoms even after years of being back on Earth. However, perhaps the most concerning effect of microgravity is on the ventricles, which, as we recall, contain CSF and grow in size during prolonged periods in space as a result of reduced CSF outflow. Here there also appears to be long-term potential consequences of this temporarily reduced ability to clear out CSF, as when CSF outflow is reduced, protein waste is able to accumulate and build up within the brain. Therefore, as a result of the various hazards that microgravity poses on the short and long-term level, the ISS is currently investigating and developing countermeasures to microgravity, but you can find out more about that in future videos.